You stand in the shadowed corridor of the palace, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and something sharper, like fear soaked into the silk hangings. It's 39 AD, and you're 14, your heart pounding as footsteps echo from the emperor's chambers. You press against the cool marble wall, peering through a crack in the door. There, two servants drag a girl, no older than you, across the floor. Her name was Livia, you think. She whispered it to you yesterday through the lattice between your rooms. Her tunic is torn at the shoulder, her hair matted, but it's her eyes that freeze you wide open, staring at nothing, as if whatever was inside her has been hollowed out. She doesn't cry or struggle, she just hangs limp between them, feet scraping the stone like a discarded doll. A hand clamps over your mouth from behind, a servant, her grip iron despite the gentle perfumes she carries. Don't look, she hisses, pulling you back into your chamber. The door clicks shut, locking with that final, echoing thud. You slide to the floor, knees to chest, the room spinning around you. This place they call the Garden of Venus. Its fountains murmur softly outside. Birds sing in gilded cages. But you know now it's no garden. It's a waiting room for something that breaks girls without killing them. 3 days ago, you arrived thinking it was an honor, a chance to serve the empire. Your parents beamed with pride as the carriage pulled away. But whispers from the other rooms tell a different story. Girl, summoned at night, returning changed, or not returning at all. And as the sun dips low, casting long shadows across your bed, you hear those footsteps again, pausing outside doors, choosing. You pull the covers over your head, praying they pass you by. But deep down, you sense the truth. This isn't random. This is calculated, a machine that grinds souls into silence. Welcome to the historical archives, where we unearth the systems that erased countless lives, exposing the psychological architectures of power that history tried to bury. If revealing these hidden truths moves you, subscribe now to join us in honoring the voices long silenced. To grasp the horror unfolding in that palace corridor, we must pull back to the fractured world that forged it. Rome in the late 30s AD wasn't just an empire, it was a vast apparatus of control, where emperors wielded not only legions but the very fabric of society, family, honor, and fear to maintain dominance. Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus in 12 AD, didn't emerge as a tyrant from nowhere. He was sculpted by a lineage of imperial violence that turned personal trauma into systemic weapon. As a child, Caligula, nicknamed for the tiny soldier's boots he wore in his father's military camps, witnessed the empire's underbelly. His father, Germanicus, a celebrated general, died under suspicious circumstances in 19 AD, likely poisoned on orders from Emperor Tiberius, who saw rivals everywhere. What followed was a methodical dismantling of Caligula's family, his mother, Agrippina, exiled and starved, his brothers imprisoned, one gnawing at his own bedding in desperation before death, another driven to suicide by isolation and torment. By his late teens, Caligula was the sole survivor, summoned to Tiberius's secluded villa on Capri, a place ancient sources like Suetonius describe as a laboratory of depravity, where the old emperor indulged in excesses far from Rome's prying eyes. For 6 years, Caligula observed Tiberius's methods, not brute force alone, but a calculated erosion of will through humiliation, isolation, and complicity. When Tiberius died in 37 AD, rumors persist Caligula hastened it with a pillow. The young man ascended, initially hailed as a liberator. He pardoned exiles, funded games, and seemed the antithesis of his predecessor's paranoia. But a mysterious illness that years shattered him further, unleashing a reign where personal demons became policy. Historians like Cassius Dio and Suetonius, drawing from contemporary accounts, paint this as no mere madness, but a deliberate extension of Tiberius's tactics, now amplified across the empire. This video from the historical archives will reveal how Caligula's Garden of Venus wasn't isolated cruelty, but an engineered psychological system, a bureaucracy that commodified innocence to enforce silence and loyalty. By the end, you'll see why this wasn't just about one emperor's appetites, but a template for how power weaponizes vulnerability to control entire societies, erasing victims while binding the complicit in chains of shame. We'll trace the machine's gears, follow the paths of those ensnared, and connect it to echoes that persist today, reminding us that such systems thrive in the shadows of denial. At the heart of Caligula's terror lay a meticulously organized apparatus, one that transformed human lives into administrative tasks. This wasn't the whim of a deranged ruler acting alone. It was a network of officials, protocols, and incentives that mirrored Rome's vaunted bureaucracy, typically used for taxing provinces or mobilizing legions. now repurposed for psychological domination. Ancient chroniclers like Suetonius in his Lives of the Caesars and Cassius Dio in his Roman History, compiling from senatorial records and eyewitness testimonies, outline the process in stark fragments, emphasizing its efficiency over its savagery. It began with selection teams, pairs of imperial agents, often equestrians or freedmen loyal to the palace, dispatched across Rome and nearby territories like Latium and Campania. Armed with wax tablets and imperial seals, they operated under quotas, much like census takers. Their criteria were precise: girls aged 12 to 16, of verifiable virginity, confirmed through family attestations or, in disputed cases, cursory examinations by midwives, and possessing attributes deemed pleasing. A euphemism for youthful beauty that aligned with the emperor's preferences. These weren't random abductions. Agents targeted families across social strata, from humble plebeians to noble patricians, framing their invitation as an imperial honor. Refusal wasn't an option. Resistance could label a household as disloyal, inviting property seizure or worse. Once identified, girls were catalogued in ledgers: name, age, physical descriptors, family status, and even notes on demeanor. Suetonius notes Caligula's personal inspections, likening them to a merchant appraising slaves at market, measuring value not in labor, but in potential for control. This inventory system ensured a steady supply, preventing depletion and maintaining the emperor's whims without disruption. Transportation followed. Girls were escorted in covered carriages to the Palatine Hill Palace, isolated from families to begin the psychological unraveling. The Garden of Venus itself was the machine's core, a wing of the imperial residence redesigned as a gilded cage. Archaeological hints from Palatine excavations reveal opulent features: mosaic floors, depicting mythological scenes of love and conquest, frescoes of blooming gardens, and chambers furnished with imported silks, perfumes from Arabia, and delicacies like peacock tongues. But this luxury served a darker function. Psychologically, it induced disorientation. Historians suggested echoed techniques observed in Tiberius's Capri retreats, where sensory overload masked underlying captivity. Girls were confined to individual rooms, denied calendars or external contact, fed on schedules that disrupted sleep, and attended by servants who doubled as informants. Any sign of resistance, tears, questions, attempts at friendship, was noted and quashed, often by room reassignments or subtle threats. This setup weaponized waiting as a tool of erosion. Drawing from modern analogues in trauma studies, though ancient sources don't name it, the process aligns with induced helplessness. Repeated unpredictability trains the mind to surrender agency. Summons came irregularly via nocturnal escorts, ensuring constant dread. The acts themselves, implied in sources as violations of purity, were framed not as assaults but imperial favors, further twisting victims' perceptions. Post-encounter, girls were either returned altered, monitored for compliance, or quietly removed, perhaps to estates or worse, their fates undocumented to preserve the facade. Economically, the system was self-sustaining. Agents received bonuses for quality acquisitions. Families gained minor privileges like tax relief, binding them in complicity. Legally, it hid behind edicts on imperial prerogative, where the emperor embodied the state, making dissent treason. This fusion of administration and psychology wasn't accidental. It solved Caligula's problem of insecurity, using vulnerability to deter opposition. By implicating elites through gifts of access or forced witnessing, the machine extended its reach, turning potential rebels into silent accomplices. What emerges from these records isn't chaos, but a calculated engine of erasure, where cruelty functioned as governance, ensuring no voice rose against the throne. Imagine you're Julia, a 14-year-old from a modest family in the Subira district of Rome. It's early 39 AD, and life has been simple, helping your mother weave cloth in the dim light of your tenement, dreaming of marriage to the baker's son down the street. Your father, a veteran of the legions, speaks proudly of the empire's glory, though his limp from a German campaign tells another story. One afternoon, a knock echoes through your home. Two men in crisp tunics, bearing the imperial eagle seal. They don't force entry, they present it as summons, an opportunity for you to serve at the palace. Your parents exchange glances, pride mixed with unease. But the agent's words are honeyed honor, gifts for the family, a step up in Rome's rigid hierarchy. You board the carriage that evening, the city's clamor fading as it climbs the Palatine. Whispers from neighbors follow, envy for some, pity from others who know more but say nothing. Arrival brings disorientation. The garden's gates swing open to courtyards alive with fountains and exotic birds, air scented with myrrh. Servants usher you to a chamber, a bed piled with cushions, walls painted with scenes of nymphs in eternal spring. Rest, they say, smiles fixed like masks. But the door locks from outside, and questions go unanswered. Days blur, meals arrive at odd hours, honeyed figs, spiced meats you've never tasted. You try counting sunrises through the barred window, but exhaustion creeps in. At first, hope flickers. Perhaps this is training for court service, like the Vestal virgins you've heard of, sacred, protected. You befriend a girl in the adjacent room through whispers, Antonia 13, from a farming family near Ostia. You share stories of home, clinging to normalcy. But servants notice. One night, you're moved to a distant wing, isolation hitting like a blow. Now, alone, doubts gnaw. Footsteps at midnight become your torment, pausing, selecting another. You hear muffled cries, then silence. One morning, a girl returns to the common area, eyes vacant, movements mechanical, refusing food. Whispers circulate, she's been chosen. And what followed left her shattered, her spirit fractured by something unspoken. A violation that twists innocence into numbness. Your own summons comes on a moonless night. Escorts appear, faces impassive, leading you through torchlit halls to the Emperor's quarters. Caligula awaits, his presence a storm, charming one moment, volatile the next. Ancient accounts imply the encounter without detail, a calculated breach of purity, designed not just for gratification but to imprint helplessness. You emerge hours later, servants guiding your stumbling steps back. The world tilts, shame floods in, unamiable, as if your very self has been rewritten. Back in your room, mirrors reflect a stranger, bruises hidden under tunics. But the deeper wounds invisible, a mind reeling from betrayal, questioning if resistance would have mattered. Days stretch, you're monitored, any defiance noted. Some girls vanish, sent away, fates unknown. You learn to perform compliance, eat, smile faintly, suppress tears. Psychologically, it's a siege, the luxury mocks your suffering, eroding will. Memories of home warp was your family's pride, complicity. Weeks pass in this limbo, until release, bundled into a carriage with trinkets, worn to silence. Home awaits, but you're changed, flinching at touches. Nightmares clawing sleep. Your parents avoid questions that honor, now a shadow over meals. Julia, once vibrant, now withdraws, her story buried in whispers. Yet in quiet moments, you cling to fragments of self, a quiet resistance against the machine that sought to erase you entirely. But the system's reach extended beyond common girls like Julia, escalating to ensnare even the elite in variations that refined its psychological grip. Consider Valeria, a 15-year-old from a senatorial family, her life steeped in privilege. Tutors in rhetoric, banquets where politics whispered like incense. In 40 AD, agents arrive not with force, but invitation. Her father, a consul, sees it as alliance building, a way to curry favor amid Caligula's growing paranoia. Valeria departs with finery, expecting courtly duties, perhaps poetry recitals in the emperor's presence. Her garden experience mirrors Julia's, but twists sharper due to status. Isolated in a more ornate chamber, gold-threaded linens, views of the Tiber, the dissonance bites deeper. Why confine nobility like chattel? Friendships form tentatively, but separations come swift, amplifying loneliness. Whispers reveal nobles aren't immune. Some are loaned, post, summons to allies, turning violation into currency. Valeria's call arrives midday, a deviation, escorted to chambers where Caligula, flanked by scribes, inspects her like inventory. The encounter, as sources suggest, blends coercion with flattery, implying her family's rise depends on compliance. Emerging, she's not discarded but retained longer, a favorite. In the twisted hierarchy, witnessing others' summons, forced into complicity. This escalation reveals the system's adaptability. For nobles, it wasn't just breaking individuals but fracturing lineages. Valeria observes banquets where wives are selected, her own aunt, perhaps husbands frozen in silence. Cassius Dio recounts such scenes, Caligula detailing encounters publicly, rating performances to humiliate. For Valeria, this twists the knife she's paraded, her purity's lost broadcast subtly, eroding family honor. Psychologically, it's layered warfare, guilt for surviving when others don't, shame amplified by status. Release comes with gifts, estates for her father, but strings attached, loyalty oaths binding them closer. Yet here's the twist, some, like Valeria, find cracks. Fragments from later writers hint at subtle resistances, notes smuggled via servants, alliances with sympathetic guards. One account, preserved in a Byzantine compilation, suggests a noble girl feigned illness post-encounter, escaping further use. For Valeria, survival means adaptation, marriage arranged quietly to a distant ally, her story veiled. But escalation breeds backlash, humiliated elite simmer, feeding conspiracies. The system in targeting higher tiers sows its undoing. Nobles with resources plot in shadows, their variations exposing the machine's overreach. By 41 AD, this refinement backfires, as personal grievances fuel the blade that ends the reign. The ripple effects of Caligula's machine extended far beyond the palace walls, reshaping Roman society in ways that echoed through generations and find parallels in modern systems of institutionalized silence. Demographically, the garden processed dozens, perhaps hundreds, over 4 years. Suetonius alludes to crowds of young women, disrupting families across classes. Common households lost daughters to trauma, marriages foregone, lineages stunted, nobles faced eroded prestige, with damaged girls sidelined in alliances. Culturally, it entrenched fear. Rome's emphasis on pudicitia as virtue turned weaponized, victims blamed implicitly, fostering a collective amnesia. Populations internalized the lesson, dissent invites erasure, suppressing unrest amid Caligula's extravagances like mock sea battles or self-deification. Memory proved the ultimate battleground. Claudius, succeeding in 41 AD, purged records, ledgers burned, witnesses bribed with imperial largesse. Archaeological evidence from the Palatine, scattered artifacts like perfume vials, hints at the site's scale, but deliberate destruction buried truths. Surviving fragments, copied by monks in medieval scriptoria, reveal how victims' stories endured piecemeal, a deathbed confession here, a coded letter there. This selective forgetting warped history, Tacitus writing later, layman's lost annals, suggesting the full horror exceeded what remained. These consequences imprinted on Roman institutions. Subsequent emperors like Nero echoed tactics, though subtler, while laws on treason expanded, codifying complicity. The empire's fall centuries later carried these scars, systems prioritizing control over humanity. Today, echoes resound in institutional abuses. Think of modern scandals in churches or governments where bureaucracies enable cover-ups, victims isolated through NDAs or relocation, complicity enforced via career threats. Psychological studies on survivor trauma, flashbacks, dissociation, mirror Galen's ancient observations of deadened women. Social media shaming or state-sponsored disappearances reprise the humiliation machine, erasing voices while binding bystanders in silence. Caligula's template warns, unchecked power commodifies vulnerability, but remembrance disrupts the cycle, connecting past erasures to present fights for accountability. As we close this chapter from the historical archives, remember Julia and Valeria, not as numbers in a ledger, but as lives interrupted, their resilience a quiet defiance against a machine built to crush them. The cruelest legacy wasn't the acts themselves, but the engineered silence that followed, turning complicity into a societal chain. Empires rise and fall, but these patterns persist, waiting in the wings of power. By uncovering them, we honor the erased, ensuring their stories serve as warnings. If these revelations remind you of humanity's fragility and the need to amplify hidden voices, subscribe to the historical archives. Join us in keeping the past alive to safeguard the future. Thank you for watching.